Welcome to this explainer. Today we're diving into Maggie Gyllenhaal's 2026 film, The Bride, and discovering how it's actually a profound, beautifully constructed microcosm of the human mind. On the surface, you might think you're just sitting down for a slick, modern gothic thriller, but man, the layers underneath are absolutely fascinating.
So, what if Frankenstein's monster was actually a metaphor for trauma recovery? We're going to completely subvert our expectations of a gothic monster movie today. Instead of just looking at stitched-up bodies and mad scientists, we're looking at the physical events of this story, the creation, the violent rebellion, the desperate police chases, as a direct literal metaphor for mental events and emotional regulation. It completely changes the game on how you watch this movie.
To navigate this complex psychological allegory, here's our roadmap. First, we'll look at whether this is a monster movie or a psychological drama. Second, we'll map out the parts of the system. Third, we'll explore the language of music. And finally, we'll trace the journey to self-leadership.
All right, Section 1, monster movie or psychological drama. Let's decode the psychological framework.
Our entire analysis today relies on a very real clinical model called internal family systems, or IFS. Now, this is a psychological framework suggesting our minds aren't just one single unified voice. No way. Instead, our minds operate like a complex, sometimes deeply traumatized internal family made up of distinct subpersonalities or parts. Kind of like your mind is a chaotic family dinner. When we view The Bride through this IFS lens, the movie fundamentally transforms. It goes from a horror story into a stunning visual representation of internal psychological restructuring.
Moving right along to Section 2, the parts of the system, or the cast of the mind.
This perfectly illustrates our framework. The entire film is essentially taking place inside a single psychological system, with each character playing a specific clinical role. The bride maps to the exile. Frank is the manager. Dr. Euphronius represents a corrupted self, and the police are the harsh protectors. Let's actually break each of these down so you can see exactly how this internal family functions.
First up, we've got Jessie Buckley's character, the bride, originally named Ida. In traditional Frankenstein lore, the bride is usually this silent, compliant companion. But here, she represents an exile. In IFS theory, an exile is a part of our mind holding our absolute deepest trauma, pain, or fear, usually locked away to protect the rest of the system. But in this film, this exile has been granted a second chance at life, and she just burst forth with this extreme, uncontainable energy.
Notice the emphasis here on the rise of the exile. As the source material highlights, she absolutely refuses her predefined role as just a companion. She goes through a clinical process called unblending. Basically, she detaches from her creator's expectations, sheds the heavy burden of past fears, and fights aggressively to find her own true identity. Yes, it's a violent, messy rebellion, but psychologically speaking, it's an absolutely necessary step toward healing.
On the flip side, we have Christian Bale's Frankenstein, or Frank. He perfectly embodies a manager. See, in IFS, managers are the parts of us that try to keep us safe by controlling our environment and our relationships. They're desperately trying to prevent those exiles from ever getting hurt again. Frank is this exhausted internal part, desperately trying to control his existence. He literally has the bride created in a frantic attempt to fill his own emotional void with an external solution.
His underlying motivation is simple but profound. He's a lonely manager seeking connection. And here is where the massive psychological breakthrough happens in the film. Instead of controlling her like a typical manager would, he gets completely swept up in her journey. They form this wild Bonnie and Clyde dynamic. It beautifully represents two societal outcasts, or, in our metaphor, two internal outcast parts of the exact same mind, stopping their internal war and finally seeking harmony together.
To complete our system, we have to look at the external forces. We've got Annette Bening's Dr. Euphronius, representing the mind's central leadership, or the self. But her self is corrupted by ambition and this intense desire to control nature. She completely lacks true empathy for her creation. Then, you've got Detective Jake Wiles and the police acting as harsh, rigid protectors. Psychologically, these are the extreme defense mechanisms terrified of the rising exile, aggressively trying to repress her and maintain the old, broken status quo.
As all this tension builds, we move to Section 3, the language of music, representing the climax of expression. The film uses chaotic, highly energetic dance sequences, and it's not just for visual spectacle. These serve crucial psychological functions. The source breaks this down into three distinct clinical mechanisms that regulate the mind: unburdening the exile, achieving internal harmony, and activating the firefighter mechanism.
Let's look at those first two. Unburdening happens when the bride dances wildly. And why dance? Well, because logical words are usually controlled by the manager parts of our brain. By using her body, she totally bypasses that logic to violently release her past pain. Then we see internal harmony. When Frank and the bride finally dance together, it's not just some romantic moment. It's a profound metaphor for internal parts dropping their defenses, finding a common rhythm, and actually working together instead of fighting for control of the mind.
But, the music in this film isn't just about harmony. When the external pressure from the police gets way too severe, the mind panics and activates what IFS calls a firefighter mechanism. A firefighter is an extreme internal defense strategy. When an exile's pain is just too much, or the threat is too high, the firefighter rushes in to distract the system using really intense, impulsive, and sometimes downright destructive behaviors. In the film, this is visualized through these frantic, manic, punk, and gothic sequences. This intense music and erratic dancing serve exactly as this firefighter defense. It gives the characters a temporary, euphoric, almost destructive escape from an insanely oppressive reality. It's literally the mind screaming, distract, 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 just to survive the overwhelming stress.
Okay, let's see how all of these warring parts build to a resolution in our final section, Section 4, the journey to self-leadership. The absolute crucial point here is this: the bride isn't just a gothic story of a monster rebelling against its creator. It is a triumphant quest for self-leadership. True self-leadership in IFS means the core self is finally guiding the system and honoring all the parts. The bride refuses to be someone else's puzzle piece, not a solution for Frank's loneliness, not a science experiment for Euphronius. She claims her own autonomy. She literally and metaphorically chooses to stitch her own broken pieces together into a complete, sovereign entity, regardless of the societal chaos it causes.
You can observe this incredible psychological tapestry yourself very soon. The film hit premium VOD platforms like Amazon Prime and Apple TV back in April 2026, and it arrives for streaming on HBO Max by the end of May. It is absolutely worth a watch, especially with this new framework in mind. Seriously, you will never view a monster movie the same way again.
So as you watch the bride bravely navigate her fractured existence, unburden her trauma, and finally find harmony with her internal managers, the real question this explainer leaves you with is this: how are you leading the different parts of your own mind? Are you ready to stitch your own internal pieces together? Keep learning, keep exploring, and I'll catch you on the next explainer.